Hello, my name is Robert Whaley. Today is the 17th of January, 2017. And to give a brief summary of our last shows, the official electoral vote for Trump was 306 to 232 for Hillary. Some Republican electors tried to defy the state election laws, which bind the electoral vote to the popular vote. A few Democratic electors tried to defect from the Democratic Party state laws. But those 6 or 7 defectors made a one-day headline, but their gesture was just an act of futility. Trump has decided to appoint Rex Tillerson, CEO of ExxonMobil, as his Secretary of State. This is unprecedented. The Anglo-American oil cartel from 1927 to 1970 had great influence on American foreign policy. As of 12th of December 2017, Tillerson has been quizzed by the Democratic and Republicans in the Senate, Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, as to how his foreign policy may differ from the ambitions but uninformed plans of President-elect Trump. Tillerson would push back hard on Russia, which is trying to expand its influence in the Ukraine and Syria. ExxonMobil has had lobbying activities and been reluctant to reveal that his owned many oil fields concessions in Putin's Russia for many years. Anyway, Mario Rubio, Cuban-American from Florida, is indicating that he may vote against Tillerson and join the Democrats, who will surely vote against Tillerson and Tillerson's confirmation. So, the Republicans are debating amongst themselves about the future of Trump's and Tillerson's foreign policy. Vice President-elect Mike Pence wants to concentrate on military activities against Iraq and Syria's military plans. Pence would like to cancel the 5-power Security Council plus Germany. That agreement of 6 powers made a nuclear disarmament treaty to expose Iran's nuclear weapons potential. In the past, the Secretary of State has been a political appointee and is not a corporate executive leader with his own economic interests. That's what's unprecedented. Tillerson's appointment is controversial because it disrupts the political and corporate balance of power. Tillerson's appointment would undermine the balance of power between those who believe in democracy and economic power.
Okay, Robert, at that point, let's let David respond to that
Okay.
Mr. Tillerson's appointment.
I think it's ironic at this point that Marco Rubio holds the fate of Trump's nominee in his hands, considering the contentiousness they posed each other back in May last year. And Marco Rubio had some tough questions for him. He pressed him pretty hard on his thoughts about Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Putin's actions both in Syria and against his political opponents in Russia. And I'm not sure that Tillerson was able to provide a satisfactory answer. Rubio really hasn't indicated, as far as I can tell since then, whether or not he's going to vote for this. If he is, I suspect that he's going to extract some promises of his own. from
Right.
the incoming administration, considering how power typically works.
So getting back to my theme, I'm going back to Franklin Roosevelt. Now, Franklin Roosevelt, as president, appointed Nelson Rockefeller in 1941 as his Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America inside Roosevelt's administration. Rockefeller was only a political appointee who had to take his orders from the Secretary of State and the President. Trump has appointed Jeff Sessions from Alabama as his Attorney General, and I don't have very much to say about that. And Republican Majority Leader will continue to be Senator Mitchell McConnell from Kentucky. So the Republicans as a party are gaining power with Trump's election. The new Republican Speaker of the House will be Representative Kevin McCarthy. Question mark, what state does he come from?
I believe that Kevin McCarthy comes from California.
Okay.
Although, as far as I know, he's the majority leader, and
Yeah,
Paul Ryan will continue on as Speaker of the House.
Ryan will be the Speaker.
Right.
I
Yes.
I do not like Jeff Sessions as Attorney General.
Right.
As Attorney General, he's tasked with upholding
Right.
civil rights law,
Right.
which he has expressed prejudice against in the past. And more disturbingly to me, well, I shouldn't say more disturbingly, but just as disturbingly to me, and he wasn't pressed on this too much in his confirmations hearings, he's also expressed enthusiastic support for waterboarding and torture in the past.
Right.
And I find that inexcusable, and it doesn't seem, while Tillerson was asked if he would uphold the law against torture and waterboarding, I didn't see that Sessions was asked that. And I think that he should have been pressed harder on that.
Well, did Tillerson make a satisfactory response?
Tillerson said that he would support the current law that forbids
Yeah.
waterboarding and torture.
Okay.
But you know, David, what happens is when you take people in to interrogate them, and you fall under that rule, and you're going to abide by that rule. Unfortunately, they farm these prisoners out to another country in which waterboarding is permissible.
When you say they, you mean the CIA.
Perhaps it could be, but what I'm saying is it doesn't prevent them from getting. I don't believe in waterboarding either, but it doesn't prevent them from being waterboarded. We just didn't do it. Another country. I'm not going to name another country, but
Egypt. Egypt was one.
Well, Egypt. Well, that's who comes to my mind.
Poland was another one.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, that's what happens.
Yeah, and so
they just
so
and
people
so
are still
we
tortured.
didn't do it. We
Yeah.
didn't do it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Well,
somebody else did.
I consider that type of evasion to be dishonest and
Well, it is.
immoral
It certainly
and
is.
unethical.
But in their in the way they think, it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That fits into
a
their
sad
code
reality.
of ethics.
Right.
So,
So
that's something you really got to remember is that all these different countries or regimes or whatever have a different code of ethics.
Right.
They don't adhere to what we consider the right thing to do.
Anyway.
And I'm sure Robert can give an example of that somewhere.
Oh yeah. Well, there's plenty of countries that haven't signed on to international human rights compacts and Geneva Convention and
the
whatnot.
Geneva Convention they don't even recognize.
Right.
Well, some sign on, but they don't enforce
And
it.
then they ignore
Right.
it.
Yeah. So the new Secretary of Defense will be a military man and not a civilian. But that appointment is also unprecedented. This general has had lots of combat experience as the combat general in the United States Marine Corps.
Are you talking about Maddox?
James Mattis.
Mad Dog Maddox.
Yeah, that's a nickname.
Well, that ought to explain something, though.
Yeah.
He didn't acquire that nickname.
Yeah,
Right.
and he was born in Pullman, Washington. He served as a combat soldier in Iraq and Afghanistan campaigns. in the long wars from 1969 to 2012. 2013, I guess. Mattis would like to have peace in the Middle East, but he is suspicious of Vladimir Putin's Russia and so-called president of the Russian Federation. He was not an elected president.
Robert, perhaps we're deviating from what we started here with, but recently on the John Batchelor show on WABC in New York, there's a man on there, and I don't recall his name, promoting a book, but he talks about how in 1776, how we got involved in the Barbary Coast thing, and at that time in 1776, we, with countries like Libya and Tunisia, 20% of our exports went to Morocco and up through there. And
well, I think that's a little bit off the topic.
Well, you mentioned the fact that trouble in the Middle East. A lot of people my point was they don't realize that it went all the way back to the founding of this country.
The Middle East wasn't even called the Middle East.
No, it wasn't. It was called the Barbary Coast.
All right. Well, that's a different ball game.
Yeah.
And it wasn't 1776.
Well, according to the book, it was.
Well, that's way off.
Yeah.
It was under Thomas Jefferson's presidency.
Well, that's when he put
was
together
elected in
the Marines.
Yeah.
Well, he had Marines in 1800.
That's how we combated those people.
So let's leave 1776 out.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this was essentially it was a raid on pirates.
Yeah.
There was no sovereign state called Morocco.
Right.
There was a tribe there called the Berbers. They were wild pirates. And the British, the Italians, anybody who had shipping in the Mediterranean didn't like the Moroccans. So the Moroccans had no ally, well, they had primitive weapons, to say the least. So that's why I said it's a little bit off the topic.
Okay.
Because the Middle East today is well armed with modern weapons.
Right.
And Egypt and Turkey and Iran are major middle-sized powers. Now that's a different ball game. We have Arab nationalism.
Right.
That's a different ball. The Barbary pirates had no idea what a nation was. You know when Morocco became a nation and why it became a nation?
No, I don't.
Okay. The British and French carved up Africa. And they both wanted Egypt. That was the prize. So the French dug the canal, de Lesseps, in 1869. But the British, through money, got half the shares of the Khedive of Egypt, because the Khedive of Egypt was a barbarian spendthrift and spent all of his profits.
Yeah.
So he had to borrow money. So he comes to the Rothschilds Bank in London and says, okay, we'll buy half the shares. So the British get half the shares of the Suez Canal, well, 40%. 40% of the shares of the Suez Canal Company. Yeah. And then the British sent troops in 1882 to protect the canal.
Right.
And the French were furious. So there was an Anglo-French rivalry between 1882, and the British promised 66 times that they would withdraw sooner or later from Egypt.
Yeah.
It was a promise they never kept. Well, in 1904, the ball game changed. In 1904, the German fleet came into being. And the Germans, under the Kaiser, were saying, well, I think we'll land in Morocco and take over Morocco. Well, the French said, no, you don't. So the British then signed a deal with the French. You can have Morocco free and clear, but then you're going to give Egypt free and clear to British. And that was the Anglo-French Entente. Not an alliance, an entente. Right. Means understanding. They had parallel policies. And that was one of the stepping stones to World War I. That's the balance of power.
Yeah. I'm glad you cleared that up. Thank you.
Yeah, good.
All right. David, He was talking about, you were talking about the Secretary of Defense, or?
Yeah, the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, was born in Pullman, his combat, so forth and so on. And he would like, personally, peace in the Middle East. He thinks we're exhausted there. But he's suspicious of Vladimir Putin's Russia. So if there's going to be a war, the United States should be prepared to go to war against Russia. Okay. In fact, Vladimir Putin has been a career intelligence officer in the old USSR and Boris Yeltsin regime and the chairman Mikhail Gorbachev, in the last two communist leaders, led to the destruction of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union became defunct. So Vladimir Putin has had a long tradition of being a spy. Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to end that, and the questions from now on are going to be Dave DeWitt and Steve Handel. Steve Handel is going to ask Dave DeWitt to ask this new question about what are the other picks of the new Trump administration for the cabinet posts. Okay?
Okay, that's it. David, you heard that.
All right. Well, I'll just try to go through as many as I can, as quickly as I can. For Secretary, and these are people that he's nominated so far.
Right.
They're all still going through the confirmation process. Secretary of Treasury is Steve Mnuchin. He's a...
Stephen Nugent?
Mnuchin? I don't know.
How do you pronounce that?
It's spelled Mnuchin.
That's
Mnuchin.
Yeah.
Mnuchin. Yeah. He's a former partner of Goldman Sachs, a hedge fund manager.
That's
money, big money.
Big money, for sure. In fact, the whole cabinet's it's a cabinet of millionaires and billionaires. There's almost nobody on this cabinet that's not a millionaire, at least. Secretary of Labor, he's nominated Andrew Puzder, who is a fast food mogul, the chief executive of the CKE restaurants that include Hardee's and Carl's Jr. and etc. He's actually been found in violation of labor law, and now he's going to be charged with enforcing it.
So the Democrats are going to give him a rough time.
I assume so. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development is Ben Carson.
Well, he's an old-timer.
Which we all know from the Republican primary and his political past. Secretary of Energy is former Texas Governor Rick Perry.
Well, he's a questionable person.
A Texas oil man in charge of energy. I think that we know what we can expect there. He's just going to ratify
anything Tillerson wants. Anything Tillerson, he's going to agree.
More or less. I think that we could expect that. Secretary of Veterans Affairs, actually, I'm not too upset about this one. This one's David Shulkin, who is the current Undersecretary of Veterans Affairs for Health.
An all-time bureaucrat.
Yeah, he's an Obama appointee.
Yeah.
And it looks like Trump is going to nominate him to continue in that role. Of course, White House Chief of Staff is former RNC Chair Reince Priebus. Obvious acronym, Reince Priebus.
Well, he's a continuation of an old establishment.
Director of the Environmental Protection Agency is Scott Pruitt, the Attorney General from Oklahoma, and a climate science denier. Office of Budget Management is U.S. Representative Mick Mulvaney from South Carolina.
Now, wait a minute. Say that a little slower again.
Representative Mick Mulvaney from South Carolina.
And
South Carolina's 5th District. He is the Office of Budget Management. He's a deficit and debt hawk. Administrator of the Small Business Administration is Linda McMahon, the wife of the WWE's Vince McMahon, pro wrestling.
Pro wrestler?
Vince McMahon is the guy who owns the WWE, Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant, Stone Cold Steve Austin, pro wrestling. His wife is going to be directing the Small Business Administration.
Has he got any qualifications in government?
No. She's run for office a couple times, lost, but no. And even the business that her and her wife operate can by no measure be considered small. It's a $1 billion company, WWE, a $1 billion entertainment fake wrestling
Well, did she
company.
graduate from Harvard Business School or something? Do you know?
She graduated, let's see here. And she ran for Senate and lost. I don't see an education
Maybe
here
she's
at all.
one of those Wharton Business School. Trump's one of his.
Oh, alma mater, East Carolina University. She got a bachelor's from East Carolina University.
Wow.
So that's what it's looking like so far. Not shaping up very
David,
well.
One of Trump's advisors, and I haven't heard if he got a post or not, and whether he wants one, but is, the takeover artist Carl Icahn, who happens to be worth twice as much as, I think I saw his net worth at like $24 billion.
Right.
But you didn't see his name there anyway?
Not so far. As far as I know, he hasn't been nominated for anything at a cabinet level, at least. He might serve other roles in the administration.
In advisory
capacities, sure. But not a cabinet level position as far as I know yet. There are a couple cabinet level positions that are still open, such as the Secretary of Agriculture. And then we've got some other ones here that I didn't mention. Secretary of the Interior is U.S. Representative Ryan Zinke from Montana, an at-large.
Well, that's a kind of a neutral post.
Yeah.
What does the Interior do? What's the function of the Secretary of Interior?
The Secretary of Interior is
the forestry, the national parks.
Yeah, it's the Bureau of Land
Well, there's
Management.
not going to be too much debate about that,
National
is there?
Parks, yeah.
And he's from Montana.
The question is,
Obviously, a big one is Representative Tom Price, as Secretary of Health and Human Services. Tom Price is the one who has introduced a potential replacement for Obamacare called the Empowering Patients Act. And what this plan that Tom Price has put forward, and we don't know whether this is the one that Congress or the administration will pursue, but it's a plan that voucherizes Medicare, block grants Medicaid, establishes healthcare savings accounts as the beau ideal of health insurance in America, brings back mini med plans so you can be covered, but your coverage is essentially paper thin, so if you get sick, you go bankrupt. It supposedly includes tax incentives, but those tax incentives are never enough to purchase any sort of decent insurance plan. And as far as covering pre-existing conditions, it establishes high-risk pools in the various states for people who have costly medical expenses to be part of these high-risk pools. Another thing that never gets funded whenever they implement these things. In fact, this entire plan that Tom Price has put forward has been tried on the state level before in Washington State, and it was an unmitigated disaster. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, came out today and said that if the Republicans do repeal Obamacare, 18 million people will lose their health insurance in the first year, and upwards of 35 million
David, I
will
think
lose
Price has reassured people as much as he can
in the first 10.
The transition period from Obama to whatever the new plan is a relatively short period of time. It won't be like they're without coverage for any length of time, I don't believe. Matter of fact, Trump said it would be the same day deal, but I don't think that's quite likely.
Well, Trump, whatever Trump says, I think it's becoming obvious that Trump does not rely on any sort of thoughtful analysis before he speaks. And when he speaks, he does not indicate any sort of future implementable idea or action. It's pretty much vacuous, ephemeral nonsense. So I wouldn't count on anything that any of them say. But yeah, they've been kind of going. They've been going kind of back and forth. It really doesn't seem to me like they have any idea what they want or can legitimately accomplish at this point. So really, we're all kind of left not knowing. We don't know. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know what it's going to be. We don't know the timeline for any of it. We're all just kind of in the dark at this point. So anyway, to go on, Secretary of Education, this is a big one, Betsy DeVos. Betsy DeVos is an anti-public education crusader. She is in favor of the charter school movement. She's a millionaire, maybe even a billionaire, who's donated lots and lots of money to this charter school movement over the past 10 years that undermines public education in favor of privatized, basically privatized Christian-based education. And so I'm not very optimistic about the future of public education with her in charge of that. Secretary of Homeland Security.
I'd like to make a little comment about Christian, if I may.
Sure.
I think her understanding of Christianity is what I would call rather primitive. It kind of stops when you're 18. And I think that most Christians are raised in a Christian church from 12 to 18, and they gradually leave Sunday school and go out and meet the real wide world. And when they do, they begin to grow in different directions. And some of them become agnostic, and some of them have a more sophisticated philosophical definition of Christianity. So I regard myself as a Christian, but I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool, conservative, Bible-thumping evangelical. I see that Christianity is modified by science, it's modified by liberalism, it's modified by socialism, and you have to have some philosophy to reinterpret religion. So I'm learning something about religion every day, and my most recent acquisition is the religion of Clement Attlee. Do you know who Clement Attlee is?
I don't believe I'm familiar, no.
Well, Clement Attlee was the Labour Party victor in 1945, July 1945, who defeated Winston Churchill. Now, as a Labour Party member, he was a socialist. But he was also a Christian. Mm-hmm. So he came, or at least I read an essay about what he thought about Christianity. And he said, I believe in Christian values, and I believe in the Christian value code, but I don't believe in mumbo jumbo. So that's what I mean.
He's basically a Unitarian.
Well, Unitarians are another complex problem. You got 6 Unitarians and you have 6 points of view.
Yeah.
They believe in free thought.
Yeah.
And some of their thoughts go anti-Christian.
Well, and the point that I was making by pointing out Betsy DeVos's devotion to private Christian schools is in contrast to public education,
that's right,
where we have the separation of church and state.
Right.
And that's the reason why I mentioned it. I didn't mean it as any sort of judgment on Christianity.
I'm glad you qualified that, because that's always going to be a debate all through the Trump administration.
Yeah. And
it was a debate when I was a kid. When I went away to college, Bates College in 1948, yeah, that's right, I discovered I was the only guy on campus who would call himself a fundamentalist. Well, the term fundamentalist has died now. Nobody likes the term fundamentalist.
I think we need to remind our viewers, you're watching ACTV, Channel 9 in Athens, Ohio, with Dr. Robert Whaley.
Good.
And his colleague, David DeWitt of the Athens News.
Right.
Today's topic is, again, about the election of Donald Trump and his cabinet appointments.
And I think I'm about wrapped up with the cabinet appointments. Ambassador to the UN is South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. U.S. Trade Representative is Robert Lighthizer. But he's from Ohio, actually.
Lighthizer? What are his qualifications?
I don't know, but he's from my hometown of Ashtabula, Ohio. which is
he in
interesting to me.
Foreign trade? Does he do foreign trade deals?
He served, it looks like he served as deputy trade representative during the President Ronald Reagan administration. Other than that, he works as a lawyer.
Technically something about China.
And he at some point represented the U.S. steel industry. But that's about all there is about him.
He believes in free trade. Cut the tariffs out.
Well,
you can buy steel cheaper.
I assume that he's going to do Mr. Trump's bidding as far as trade. It seems like that is an area where Trump does have some very distinct ideas.
I'm sure
and
that
he's not just screaming into the void. So
our Senator Brown will vote against him.
Probably, and that will be interesting considering they're both Northeast Ohio boys.
Yeah.
To see that exchange, I'll be watching that.
I don't know what Kasich will have to say.
Well, Kasich's dealing with his own coup in Ohio here. Ohio Republican Party Chair Matt Borges was just ousted.
That's interesting.
From his position by a Trump supporter.
Trying to undercut Kasich.
Yeah, so Kasich's power base is kind of dwindling in Ohio right now as the Trump ethos and Trump machine rises.
Yeah. That's revenge.
Timken is the woman who is replacing Matt Borges. It is. And we all know he's not above revenge.
Right.
So that's where we're at on the cabinet as it stands today. As I mentioned earlier, they all still need to go through the confirmation process. We've had hearings on some of them, such as Tillerson and Sessions
but no votes.
Carson. No votes yet. And they will continue to do hearings on the rest.
And we'll see how fast the votes go.
Right.
Okay, am I on now?
Yeah, you're ready to go.
Do you have any? I have some further comments about Trump's lack of foreign policy experience. Trump's pick for the CIA director will be Representative Mike Pompeo, who regards Russia as the major threat to U.S. foreign policy. Pompeo is a conservative Republican from Kansas. Pompeo is also a graduate of West Point and Harvard Law School, so he has some qualifications, but he thinks Russia is behind the Syrian civil war, Daesh, also known as the Caliphate, ISIS, and ISIL. So he will be on the side of further war in the Middle East if he has a say. But Trump has the final say. Trump can either listen to him or pay no attention to him. Trump's pick for National Security Advisor, another important post for foreign policy, will be Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. He seems to want to expand the Middle East wars.
Michael Flynn was with the Defense Intelligence Agency prior to this appointment.
Right. But he seems to be more hawkish than dovish on the Middle East.
Yeah, very hawkish, I would
say.
So
will have to be, we Democrats, we pacifists will have to watch out for Flynn's next move. Combat experience does not make for a good strategy. That's the difference between Franklin Roosevelt and General Patton.
Yeah.
Eisenhower took the orders from Roosevelt. Patton wanted to march on to Berlin. His tanks were superior. Well, that was a little scandal at the end of the Roosevelt administration. There's some rumors that Patton may have been in a deliberate accident of some kind.
Oh, yeah, they call that, well...
He might have been assassinated, or it might have been a real accident.
Well, I tell you what, when you have high-ranking military officials, they have the right-of-way on the road. Seriously.
Yeah.
When he comes up with there's a couple sergeants in a Jeep, they're supposed to yield to that officer's vehicle. And
it was kind of a freak accident, too,
yeah,
the way that it happened. I mean, it was probably a 1 in 100 chance that, or more, that he would have walked away with the spinal injury, or not walked away with the spinal injury that he had. It was very it was a very unique set of circumstances that led to his death in a very quick period of time.
Well, the story I read was that there was a German hay wagon that just went across that crossing, and the guy in the car couldn't see it. The hay wagon was there. So he waited until the hay wagon... That's the story I heard. Now, that was all underground on the conspiracy theory. There's a conspiracy theory about Patton.
Yeah.
There's a conspiracy theory about a number of CIA directors. Well, I'll leave that to the theorists. We don't have a conspiracy until it's proven in a court of law. Of course, the John Kennedy conspiracy is the biggest one. That hasn't been proven.
And we could all speculate on that for days and days.
Anyway, after the 11th of September 2001, George H.W. Bush, another intelligence agency.
He was the director.
Yeah, he was the director. He was the intelligence agent.
And that's at Langley. That's what the name of the bill. It's the George Bush Intelligence Agency now.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't
McLean,
realize
Virginia.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
They never say that. I don't know why, but that's what it's called.
Well, they've got too many Republican heroes. They got the Reagan Airport.
Isn't there a Dulles?
Yeah.
The Dulles Airport.
Dulles Airport. Yeah.
Well, that leads...
Well, there was John Forster Dulles and Allen Dulles.
Right, the Dulles brothers.
Yeah. Anyway, George H.W. Bush's intelligence agent and the FBI, we have to look at those two posts. And this was called, and the third post is the Department of Homeland Security, a third intelligence agency. And all three of these agents spy on one another and spy on American citizens to discover, do they have any links to foreign powers, mostly Islamic. So they are looking very carefully at airports and looking for box cutters and bombs on U.S. overseas-bound incoming aircraft. The public have no idea how effective Presidents George Bush 41 or Clinton or Bush 43 or Barack Obama's Homeland Security Department have been in catching would-be terrorists. A secret police agency does not want to tip its hand on who they have been watching. So what experience does Trump have in nominating General John E. Kelly, United States Marine Corps, to have his new job? He wants to build a wall against Mexico.
They're going to pay us back later now.
Yeah, that's another direction.
Right.
So, whoever they pick, the new Trump administration is in for some interesting cabinet discussions. I have no idea about the future. But looking at the past, on the 4th of February, January 2017, I learned some sensational news about the relationship between President-elect Trump and Nixon and Ford's foreign policy advisor, Henry Kissinger. The source is a new article written by Eli Lake called Henry Kissinger's Washington is Coming Back Around, published in Dawn magazine on the 5th of January, 2017. And this was reprinted on HNN, the History News Channel, on the 4th of January 2017. And Bloomberg and Washington Post have published this article. Henry Kissinger has talked to Trump, the nominee, for the National Security Advisor, and he's talked to Michael Flynn several times, Trump has introduced his former assistant, K.T. McFarlane, to his Trump team. And Kissinger has talked favorably in the press a few times for Trump. Nixon's former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, 1972-74, has also visited Norway, Oslo, Norway. And the capital of Norway is Oslo. And Kissinger told the Norwegians, who tend to be pro-democratic, to remain neutral about the president-elect, Trump, to see how Trump does when he actually gets into office. So Kissinger urged Trump to nominate Rex Tillerson as the Secretary of State. Kissinger is one of the few people in the Trump cabinet orbit who can get him on the phone whenever he wants to, according to these transition advisors. When some Republican senators questioned the new nominee, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, about his closeness to Russia's Vladimir Putin, Kissinger defended the pick on TV show called Face the Nation. Kissinger helped soften the blow of Trump's victory on the 8th of November by a phone call to Taiwan's president in December to try and calm the waters in China. A journalist for the Washington Post, Eli Lake, thinks that it seems like Kissinger has restored the State Department to its position of strength as of 1975. Kissinger, after his retirement from Nixon and Ford's administration, has continued regular meetings with President Putin and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. During the Obama years, Kissinger, as a loyal Republican, lost his influence with the Obama administration. Now, a British-educated economic historian, Niall Ferguson, who now teaches at Stanford's War and Peace Institute and has written a second book, which is a biography of Henry Kissinger, and he claims that Kissinger and Trump both claim to be realists. I have long used the term balance of power instead of realism to describe Henry Kissinger's diplomacy. He has a talent of manipulating the end of the Johnson and Nixon's intervention in the Indo-Chinese civil wars. Realism tends to be passive, and balance of power is dynamic and flexible. Kissinger devised a strategy to bomb North Vietnam army positions in Cambodia secretly in 1969, which became public in May of 1970. I believe that the American mass media and most of the Democrats have never really understood the flexibility of the balance of power diplomacy, which is always dynamic from year to year and moments from crisis month to month. Realism is a very abstract word, which is the opposite of idealism or democracy. The word realism makes good sound bites on TV, but it does not really deal with the complexity of balance of power diplomacy. On the negative side, the Democrats should not forget the hard-line advisor for Nixon helped orchestrate the 1972 coup, which toppled Chile's President Salvador Allende, who was elected by Chilean voters. Kissinger and Nixon, through the CIA, helped overthrow Allende and install the dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet. In addition to Kissinger's critique of the Democratic Party, He also clashed with the neoconservatives. Democratic Senator Henry Scoop Jackson of Washington advocated possible nuclear warfare, and in the 70s, Jackson, a well-known hawk, pushed the Nixon administration to adopt sanctions against the Soviet Union in order to liberate Soviet Jewish dissidents from the Soviet Union. Henry Kissinger also himself is a Jew, but opposed Scoop Jackson's hardline ideology of conservatism. In Democratic Senator Jackson's mind, the Israeli state military needs come first. Jackson's hawkish stance tended to undermine Kissinger's own balance of power policy of negotiating nuclear arms control treaties with the Soviet Union. Kissinger lowered the tension between the United States and Moscow and Beijing as nation states as a policy which he called détente.
Yeah.
Few naive isolationists in either the Democratic or the Republican Party understood the difference between détente, entente, alignment, and alliance. As Trump prepares to take over power as president, Russia is again dividing Washington. Obama administration just last week released a report from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security that concluded the Russian intelligence services hacked leading Democrats and leaked information to the press. Trump and his transition team have cast doubt on the international intelligence of cyberspace.
David, would you like to comment on that?
I would, and before we get into the Russian business, I want to tackle Henry Kissinger here.
Go ahead, tackle him.
For a little bit. I'm going to forego our usual. I am not a fan of Henry Kissinger at all. I've been public this program multiple times, asserting my belief that he is responsible for millions of people's deaths.
Millions.
And
well, that's a little high.
But we're going to get past that. I want to go into a different type of analysis right now,
okay,
because I want to recall the type of statesmanship that Henry Kissinger offers and how I think it dovetails with Trump's personality. And that is Kissinger's doctrine of being impulsive and unpredictable. I believe Kissinger's statesmanship over the years has shown that he places a certain amount of importance on creative and unexpected responses to crises, and I think that that's why Donald Trump and his unpredictability is in accordance with Kissinger's philosophy historically, such as, for instance, drawing a parallel between Nixon's secret plan to end the war in Vietnam and Trump's secret plan to destroy ISIS or Daesh right now. I think that there's a parallel there. I think that the irrational actors. So let me just quote this. This is from Greg Grandin, who wrote recently this year Kissinger's Shadow, which is a great book. Greg Grandin's a professor at New York University. Kissinger in 1957 is a quote: "To convey the maximum credible threat, limited nuclear war seems a more suitable deterrent than conventional war," he said. The United States needs a diplomacy that can, quote, "break down the atmosphere of special horror which now surrounds the use of nuclear weapons." Compare this to Trump in 2016 talking about the use of nuclear weapons. "I don't want to take anything off the table. We have to negotiate," quote unquote. And now I think that this is designed specifically diplomatically to project an air of unpredictability and to try to negotiate from a position of strength. Just in the past couple days, we've seen Trump say that the one China policy is negotiable. This is the one China policy that Kissinger is known for. Again, this is to assert a position of strength in negotiating with China over things such as the South China Sea and other things. It all perfectly, I'm not surprised at all that Trump is being advised by Kissinger, to tell you the truth, because everything that Trump has done with regard to unpredictability is within the leitmotif of Kissinger's statecraft. I just don't have a very optimistic view right now about how well that's going to work, considering the enormously delicate situations we're dealing with right now worldwide, such as, take for instance, the phone call to Taiwan. Now, Kissinger affected surprise at that phone call, but he may have been in on it. But let's just take that as a bargaining chip. Might stoke tensions with China, especially with the precarious situation right now in the South China Sea. And then we have a variety of other situations going on right now. We have North Korea saber rattling about nuclear weapons, and which is a major threat to the regional economic powers of South Korea and Japan. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump has been expressing ambivalence at best toward NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and emboldening Vladimir Putin every step of the way. And so I'm not entirely sure that this won't embolden Putin to weaken the alliance of NATO and possibly look at those Eastern European countries that are historically part of Russia. Finally, we go to the Middle East, which is on fire already with proxy wars in Yemen and Syria and conflicts between Shiite Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia. And Turkey appears to be drifting into tyranny and authoritarian rule and might make some bold historic claims on portions of Iraq and Syria using the Kurds as an excuse. So this is a very delicate situation that we're looking at right now, and I think that part of the strategy of the Trump team, at least if it's inspired by Kissinger, is to foster an impression of unpredictability, which might not just be an impression. I mean, he might just be as unpredictable as he seems.
Well,
Robert, I want to ask follow up on what David just said. Do you think they intentionally, and do you believe this, David, establish an unpredictable situation or whatever, or they?
I think that that's part of Kissinger's strategy. I think that Nixon used it in Vietnam. Nixon's this hardcore anti-communist, and now he's got his finger on the nuclear button. What might he do in Vietnam? And I think that was used specifically to draw people to Paris for negotiation.
It could be effective due to the fact they didn't know whether or not, if
I'm not saying it won't necessarily be ineffective.
The way it was, they would know nothing was going to happen. But if they're not sure about somebody,
right. Well, I think the way that Grandin describes this philosophy is as performance utterances that telegraph to adversaries and allies, much like Nixon and Kissinger's foreign personality, the seriousness of purpose, as he calls it. So he concludes by saying, in a way, then Donald Trump, and this is in The Nation, in a way, then, Donald Trump is Kissinger's ultimate speech act, but reality has a way of asserting itself. Kissinger, in presiding over the bombing of Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, helped transform Nixon's madman policy from performance, an act to convey insanity, into an actual act of moral insanity, the ravaging of 3 countries for no effect whatsoever except the ravaging. Okay. Now, I don't know, I'm not ready to draw that parallel yet right now, but I do know that we have a very...
saying I might and I might not.
Right.
This is how I'm going to
react. And as a negotiating tactic, it certainly leaves your adversaries off balance, to say the least. Now, I don't know what the end game of it is, though. Yeah.
Well, I would like a long rebuttal. We've got
about 2 minutes.
Yeah, a couple minutes.
We'll have to do that next time.
Well, go ahead. You can get into
Well,
it.
I might give you a hint of what this rebuttal is about. I think that when Kissinger used unpredictability, he had a lot of historical experience. So he was making predictions for himself. And he thought that Lyndon Johnson didn't know anything about Indochina, and Richard Nixon didn't know anything about Indochina.
I think Mr. Kissinger was correct in both cases there.
And what Kissinger did was to go to Harvard and psych out, well, who knows something about Cambodia and who knows something about, and Kissinger came to the conclusion, I predict that nobody can split Indochina, and the sooner the United States gets out, the better for the United States. However, Kissinger is smart enough as a diplomat, he couldn't tell that to Nixon in one sentence.
Yeah.
He fiddled around with Nixon month by month in this disguised retreat. So the people who found Nixon unpredictable were in the mass media. The mass media had no idea.
What do they call that? Piecemeal, or just a little bit at a
And
time?
not to mention the other foreign powers, though.
Yeah.
What foreign powers?
Well, China, for instance,
All right.
or Russia
Okay,
at the time.
all right.
Okay, whoa. Yeah, we're going to get in
we
that
can't-
next time.
that's next
We've
time.
got 1 minute left. You got 30 seconds, and then
Okay,
let David
we're going to
finish.
have to continue on the diplomacy of Henry Kissinger and predictability. And as a real estate dealer, I don't think that Trump has a clue about predictability of anything other than real estate deals.
Well,
That's the end of the
let me say
that's the end of the show.
I get
Okay,
I
David, go ahead.
get 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
I agree. I don't think that Donald Trump is nearly as shrewd as Henry Kissinger was, and I'm not sure the impact of his advisement now, or how much of this is orchestrated, or just simply burbling forth through the mind of Donald Trump day by day, minute by minute. Anyway, of course, debate is the oxygen of democracy, as you always say, Professor, so we'll have to continue the debate next week.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Foreign policy.